Welcome to my Life After COVID-19 video. This was recorded as an online webinar with participants all over Australia. So I'll be covering off the following topics today. We're going to be talking about overheads, labour rates and employee cards, material markups in importing, age receivables and overdue letters, as well as job filters. I really hope you can get something out of this. I had an absolute blast recording this with everyone. If you enjoyed it, like and share, as well as subscribe to my channel. And at the end of the video, stay tuned for a really exciting announcement at the end. So thank you so much for watching, and over to the video. So in terms of, I guess, the last couple of months, so it's been a bit of an odd journey for everyone really, kind of in the trade services world. So, I mean, even as a business owner, I've kind of felt that impact for myself. And I know talking to a lot of customers, it's been a bit of an emotional ride. So I just wanted to just say from me to you guys as business owners, I just wanted to give you guys a bit of a pat on the back and congratulate you guys for successfully being able to navigate yourself through this really weird time that we've kind of come into. So in terms of, like I said, what I wanted to go through, I kind of wanted to talk specifically about getting simPRO ready to get you guys back on track after the restrictions started to be lifted. So the very first part that I wanted to touch base on specifically is going to be overheads and overhead recovery inside of simPRO. So I know that some people unfortunately have had to let some staff go, find different types of work and different types of revenue that are coming into the business. So if you unfortunately have had to let people go, then in your simPRO build, your overheads are going to be affected. Overheads are one of those things that people generally tend to set and forget when they very first implement simPRO. It's not usually something that people revisit. It's something they should revisit because it's going to impact your profitability on jobs quite substantially, but it is something that kind of gets set up and then kind of gets forgotten about. So what I kind of wanted to have a bit of a chat about before we get into the actual overhead part of simPRO is actually going through, I guess, more specifically what an overhead actually is within your business. So in terms of the overheads, so the overheads really are all the hidden expenses that it costs to run your business that aren't going to be direct costs against a job. So in terms of the direct costs against the jobs, you've got all the different things that you can actually charge out for. So you've got your materials, your labor, your contractors, and also plant and equipment. Now, because we are going to cost them towards jobs, and we can also bill them out towards jobs and charge the customer for them or quote the customer for them, that would be considered a direct cost towards the job. All the other little hidden expenses that we're talking about being your operational expenses are going to be things like your rent, your utilities, your admin staff wages, your computers and systems. So simPRO is going to be an overhead. Luckily for you, this webinar is not an overhead because it's a free one. But all those other little costs that you do need to chart, that you do need to pay out for your business, like even marketing and legal costs, everything, they're all going to be overheads. So they all need to be recouped and accounted for. So in terms of how simPRO manages them, simPRO really wants to know how much per hour of labor do you need to make back to account for all these costs. So that's really where we're going to get our gross and net profitability. So our gross profitability does not include overheads. Our net profitability on jobs does include overhead recovery. So does that kind of make sense to everyone in terms of what the overheads are? Yeah, so I'm getting Darren having a bit of a nod. So in terms of the overhead recovery, does everyone has anyone taken the opportunity to actually look back over their overheads from time to time to actually rejig them to make sure that they are kind of on point? No? You haven't touched them since 2015, Darren?
I actually took them out.
You took them out? You're just running simPRO purely to gross profit?
Yep. Obviously, because the challenge is because it tends to fluctuate, and because obviously we're importing all of that data into our accounting package. So that's where we're getting our true reflection.
Okay.
So we're strictly at a GP level.
Yep, and that's fair enough, and that's a strategy that some people do adopt in terms of looking at the overheads, I guess, or the profitability of the business. If we were able to successfully negotiate overheads into simPRO, then realistically we'd be looking at kind of like a net profitability at a job level rather than just at a divisional level or at a company level. So that's kind of the advantage to being able to get overheads into the system. Even though they may not be 100% accurate 100% of the time, they're kind of like a educated guess at what your net profitability should be per job, based on the fact that you need to recover back X amount per job to ensure that you've recouped back all your operational expenses. So that's kind of why I think it's important to revisit the overheads. When you start using simPRO, I generally tend to recommend that we kind of look at your overheads every quarter, maybe then maybe push it out to every 6 months and then every 12 months and so on and so forth. But I think anytime something major happens within your business, whether that's putting on more employees or whether that's picking up new car leases or you've moved properties and the rent goes up, anytime that something like that really happens, that's going to impact your operational expense for your business. So therefore, we really should be looking at the overheads and trying to recover them back and kind of rejigging them. So specifically why I wanted to talk about the overheads in this particular webinar is because of everything that's kind of happened with COVID. If you have had to let people go, the way that simPRO's formula wants to work, we're kind of going to have to rejig our overheads because we're not going to have as many hours throughout the year to recover them back by. So from that perspective, what I kind of wanted to go through now was how the actual overheads work and how you can kind of find overhead calculators to help you rejig what the figures actually are. So once we kind of go through how we can rejig the figures, I'm then going to kind of jump back into simPRO and go through how we can then update the different tables to reflect what your overhead figures are going to be moving forward. So I'm going to just jump into the simPRO help guide for a moment. So I've kind of got this preloaded already. So if you're not aware, and I'm sure most people are, up here we've got our little question mark. We can go to the help guide over here. Once we go to the help guide, we can then do a search in here for pre-implementation resources. So simPRO actually has listed in here an overhead calculator that you can actually download and use to then work out what your overhead recovery rate should be for all your different employees. Now, one of the little caveats that I always give and simPRO always give, or any simPRO trainers or whoever it may be, is that if you are going to try and work out your overheads, it is a really good idea to maybe ask your accountant whether those figures are correct or not, because the last thing that you want to do is accidentally leave something out or put something in that shouldn't be there, and it gives you an inaccurate figure because it's a very, very difficult process to undo the overheads once they've been directly costed against the job. So once we jump into our pre-implementation resources, we do have down here what's called our overhead and employee cost calculator. So if we click on that, that's going to then download a file to your computer, which is an Excel file. We can open that up and we can actually start going through how it actually works. So in terms of how this particular calculator works, it's got a few different tabs listed in there. So we've got our notes and instructions. So the first tab is just going to be how this thing actually works. In terms of overheads, what is considered an overhead, what is considered an on cost, and what's considered direct cost. So in terms of the direct costs for the jobs, so obviously the pay rate is going to be a direct cost. So that's how much your employees are getting paid, yeah? We then have a second bucket with an employee card. And this is, I guess, up to you as a business owner to decide whether you want to go to this level or whether you just want to lump everything as an overhead. It is more accurate if you start separating out your employee costs or your on costs compared to the overheads, because different people are going to have different figures within their on costs. Generally, the on costs are going to be percentage based. So things like payroll tax, work cover, super, that is all really percentage based figures. So if someone's getting paid $30 an hour, the payroll tax or the superannuation being a percentage based figure is going to be different per employee. So really, if you want a more accurate reporting against employees, you probably do want to put them in that on-cost bucket. But if you find that it's going to be too time consuming and it's going to be a really long and tedious process to get all that done, I have got some people that just grab all those figures and dump them in the overhead bucket and just chuck everything in there. So again, depending on how you want to go about it, just depends on which way you're going to do it. So what simPRO considers to be an on-cost. So all of the other costs attributed to employment that aren't directly recoverable by the business. So things like your annual leave, your sick leave, public holidays, superannuation, work cover, payroll tax, whether you've got site allowances, any other allowances, phones and vehicles and whatever else, that's all going to be attributed to that employee. The overheads, like I spoke about before, we're really talking about business expenses. So operational expenses for your business. So all of your different bits and bobs, like your rent, utilities, marketing, and so on and so forth. So when we are setting up the employees, which is one of the things I'm going to get into shortly, I'm going to teach you where to put all those different costs in different buckets. Now, just conceptually how simPRO wants to work out overhead recovery, it wants to look to see how many billable hours can you get out of all of your employees annually, grab the total figure that you're going to work out for your overhead recovery rate and divide it by that. So if we had, for example, your overhead recovery rate that you needed to work out, your OPEX was sitting at about 600,000, and you've calculated that you can get, say, 10,000 billable hours out of all of your employees per annum. We're just going to take that 600,000 divided by 10,000 hours. That gives us realistically our overhead recovery figure that we need to recover back per billable hour to ensure that we've recovered back that whole 600,000. The calculation itself is actually relatively simple because you're just taking your billable hours. So you're taking your overhead figure divided by your billable hours, and that's it. If you want to get a little bit more complex and you want to get a bit trickier and a little bit more fine, you can use something like this to help you figure that out. So it's not a bad way to go about it, but it is a little bit more work to kind of get there, but it gives slightly better results. So how this calculator works, essentially, we're going to list down all of our different employees. We're going to say whether they are going to be included or excluded within this overhead calculation. Now, to get a little bit more accurate, realistically, what we're doing is we're saying, well, how many, so for Joel, let's pick on Joe for a sec. So Joe works 52 weeks a year. He works 5 days a week, 8 hours per day. So based on that, how many hours per day do you think on average are going to be non-billable? So how many hours are you just going to lose just by downtime, or if you don't charge for travel and lunch and all the other fun stuff, how many hours do we need to rip out of those figures? Yeah. We're going to say what Joe gets paid per hour. So in this instance, it's $27.50. We can then start adding in all the other on costs that we're talking about before, all these other fun things. So we're looking at our superannuation rate, our payroll tax if we have to pay for it, our work cover, any other employment cost per period. So that's kind of then looking at that on cost area. We then have in here, how many days are we going to have to rip out to get a more accurate indication as to how many billable days we're going to get throughout the year. So we've got public holidays, paid training days, annual leave, sick leave, all the other fun things. So if we were just to take at face value that Joe works 52 weeks a year, he works 8 hours a day, what simPRO is going to do is it's going to say, well, if that is the case, the potential billable hours for that 12-month period is going to be 2,080. But that's not necessarily realistic because we are going to have all these other things we need to rip out of that. So once we start taking out the sick leave, the annual leave, the public holidays, the paid training days and everything else, simPRO is then going to say, well, we then need to actually take off that figure 760 hours that we can't bill for or that we're not expecting to bill for. That then leaves me with a total figure of 1320. So that figure of 1320 is realistically what we're going to use to then work into the calculation of how many hours per annum we need to then divide our overhead recovery figure by to get that set amount. Now, This overhead calculator specifically then goes into a couple of other little areas in here. So it's then going to say, well, if he's getting paid X amount, his salary and wages per period are going to be this. The superannuation is going to be X. The payroll tax, had we put some in, would be in there as well, as would the work cover. So what it's then going to say is the total direct employment cost is going to be 65K. The total employment cost per billable hour is going to be 49.50, and the employee on cost per hour is going to be 22. So this is where this calculator starts getting a little bit interesting with its calculations. When it's looking at your total cost per billable hour, it's trying to prorata down how many hours per year they're actually working for. So this is going to weight up what their total billable cost, what their total employment cost is per billable hour. It's not going to look and say, well, we said it was 27 bucks. That's what we're going to put in. Well, no, this calculator is not going to do that. This calculator is going to say, well, based on the fact that he's getting paid 27 bucks and he's billable for 1,300 hours, we need to weight up how much we need to recover back based on how many hours we're getting out of him, as does this employee cost per figure as well. So it's trying to basically give you like a worst case scenario. This is how much the employees are actually costing you. The next tab across is just going to grab those figures and then start actually just kind of popping them in here. So we're then saying in here, the total overhead per figure, the total overhead recovery rate we need to work out is going to be whatever. So 600,000, for example. It's then going to just say, well, your overhead recovery rate needs to be sitting at about 91 bucks. So based on the fact that we've got 91 bucks, we've got our on cost, we've got our pay rate per hour, we've got everything else in there. This is how much those employees are actually costing you. So it's saying 140 bucks and 82 cents. So even though Joe's only getting paid 27 bucks, what it's then saying is based on the overhead recovery, the on costs and everything else, the true cost of Joe is going to be $140.82, even though he's only getting paid $27 an hour. So why we're going through this, like I said, to give this a bit more context, had you worked out your overhead recovery rate back in the day and it was sitting at a certain amount, if you have let people go, as we've discovered, we're going to lose billable hours for that period of time. Your overheads may not drop. So your on cost your total operational expense may not cost, but may not have dropped, but the amount of hours we're dividing that by would have dropped. So your overhead would have gone up. If you've put more people on the flip side, your overhead rate in theory would go down because you've got more billable hours to divide that by over the space of 12 months. So this is something that should be looked at quite frequently, and especially in the current economical climate, with where people are at with their employees. This is really something that needs to be looked at and considered to actually adjust your figures inside of simPRO. So does that kind of make sense to everyone in terms of how it all works and why we probably should be readjusting the figures inside the system? It does?
Yep.
All right, cool. So that was a nice long chat. So in terms of what we've got in simPRO, of where we're going to go from here, actually, I've just had a chat come through, so give me 2 seconds. I'm just going to see if I can get that chat up. I'm just moving to my other screen. For some reason, when I'm sharing the screen, the chat can sometimes play funny buggers. Let's try Alt-H. Nope, it's not working. Okay, I might have to double back to that
So
chat.
just a question before you continue, Adam.
Mm-hmm.
If you change that number this month, is it retrospective across the jobs that you've already got in there, or is it only from that point forward?
It's only from that point forward, man.
Gotcha.
Yep, and that's what I was kind of saying before. It's really hard to retrospectively change any profitability in simPRO.
Of course.
Because simPRO looks at a point of time. So if you have got your labor rate, so if you've got your actual costs and your on costs and all that other fun stuff in there as of this current minute, whatever I schedule forward to that is going to be looking at the employee card and then using that against the job as the direct cost and the indirect cost. Now, The reason why it won't retrospectively do anything is because you may have given Joe a pay rise. So he may have gone up from 27 bucks to 35 bucks.
Yep.
So you don't necessarily want that to go back through time and retrospectively update your jobs to say, well, even though he's worked at that rate at that given point of time, I'm now going to readjust his rates to 35 bucks. We don't want that to happen.
Yep.
We want that to only be coming into effect moving forward.
Sure.
So that's why it's really important to keep on top of things right now to make sure that it's correct from today moving forward. George has asked, does the overhead cost export to MyOb? No, it doesn't, mate. No. The only things that will export to MOB are going to be anything that you're really buying. So whether it's a contractor for labor, plant and equipment, if you're raising a purchase order for it, or materials if raised purchase orders for. They're really the only things that are going to go across to MyOb. Unless you've got inventory tracking on. If you've got inventory tracking on, then materials can journal out of an inventory account into a cost of goods sold. But employee labor and that sort of stuff, that's kind of just sits inside of simPRO, and then you do payroll over in your accounting package. And that's what kind of feeds into your chart of accounts in terms of what your costs are, or your profit and loss reports. So in terms of updating things inside of simPRO to make sure simPRO is accurate, yeah? So there's going to be a few different spots that we need to update if our overheads have changed. So if our overheads have changed, what we need to do is jump into our system setup over here, system setup. We want to go to our labor, and we want to start with our labor rates. So from a labor rate perspective, what we need to tell simPRO is what our default overhead recovery rate is. So at the moment, mine's set at 20 bucks an hour. So that's what I need to recover back. Now, that's only part one in here. The other part in here is the cost rates in this column going down here. So these labor rates inside of simPRO is not where you're going to get your actual cost from. This is where you're going to get your estimated or budgeted costs from. So if we were quoting 1 hour of standard labor, simPRO is going to say, well, based on what I've entered in here, that would cost $60. Well, it's estimated to cost 60 bucks per hour. We're selling it for $85 per hour. So therefore we should be making about 25 bucks an hour. Now, with this rate in here, if this is standard labor, this cost rate in here should include your overhead figure of $20. Because what we're doing is we're ticking the box in the labor rate to say that 60 bucks includes overhead. So when we're putting a quote together and we quote 1 hour of standard labor, simPRO is going to say, well, it costs 60 bucks. But if we then expand that out, it's going to say, well, 60 bucks consists of $40 worth of direct costs and $20 worth of overhead recovery to get to that rate of 60. So if this has changed based on all the events that have happened, these would all need to change as well. Now, the exception to the rule in here is going to be if the cost rate is things like overhead recovery, overtime. If it's overtime, then you're probably not going to be using overhead recovery for. So this one, I don't actually have any overtime set up in here. So I'll create one. So if I was to say labor, and I might just say time and a half, I might then say this is going to cost, well, if it's time and a half, my standard labor costs 40 bucks an hour. So this is going to cost, say, 60 bucks an hour for time and a half. And I might then sell that for maybe 100. Now, when I'm putting this in, I don't want this to say cost rate includes overhead. I'm going to turn that off. I'm going to add it to all my customers because it's a brand new labor rate. And I'm going to update all existing customers with this labor rate as well. So if I create that, that's now going to force that into every customer card. Now, the reason we don't want to include overhead recovery in your time and a half and double time and anything else that there's going to be is because we've actually calculated what our operational expense is based on normal hours of operation. So really, as long as we have the amount of hours in scheduled or worked against the jobs on normal time, we should have recovered back all of our overhead recovery in theory. or our operational expense. So really time and a half and double time is unexpected. We can't budget for that. We don't know how many hours we're going to use over 12 months of time and a half and double time. It's not something that we can budget for. So therefore we don't include it. So then when we're scheduling or billing out time and a half, we don't need to recover back that $20 because we've already done it in normal hours. So it's kind of a bit of a free swing on profitability because you don't need to recover back all of your OPEX. So not a lot of people kind of understand that, that we don't need to recover back overheads on our time and a half and double time. But it's a really good exercise to kind of go through. So that kind of is step one in terms of updating our overheads and updating all of our labor rates. All right, so step two is going to be updating the costs against the employee cards. So like I said, this is our budget or estimated costs per hour. The next part that's going to come into it is, well, when I schedule Joe to a job, how much does Joe actually cost? So simPRO thinks labor is going to cost $60 an hour. Depending on what your strategy is in terms of what you put in there, whether you go, right, I'm going to take my most expensive employee, I'm going to work out my estimated cost of my most expensive employee. So if I schedule my most expensive employee, at worst, I'm going to make what I thought we'd make. If I send out anyone less than that, I'm going to make more profit on labor than what I thought I would because my estimated cost is now higher than my actual cost. Some people go down that path. Some people go down the path of, okay, we might just do an average cost of labor. So our average cost of labor for an A grader might be $56 an hour. So we'll put that in there at 56. So therefore, when you schedule someone to the job, you're going to go down the path of you win some, you lose some. I think from a budgeting perspective, I generally tend to prefer going the highest paid person in that cost rate. So that way, you know, this is at worst what we will make on labor for this job. Anyone cheaper than that is a bonus. That's, I guess, I like going down worst case scenario. Anything better than that's a win. So I'm going to jump into my employees now, and we're going to go through the employee part of things. Now, obviously, this is going to depend on your security permissions in terms of whether you can get access to your employees from this perspective. So if you try and go in here and you can't see it, it may be that you don't have access to do it. So you may have to ask someone else. If you do, happy days. So I'm going to jump into my employee card. Let's have a look and see what I'm worth these days. So I'm going to open that up. I'm going to go to my pay rates. All right. So from a pay rate perspective, so this is obviously incorrect now. So if I was to schedule myself to a job, I'm saying to simPRO that my pay rate is worth $50 an hour. My on costs are $15 per hour, and my overhead recovery is going to be $15 per hour. So straight away, my overhead rate's sitting at 20. So this should match what I've got set up in my labor rate, so I don't get unexpected results. Now, me being paid $50 an hour and costing $15 an hour for my on costs, that there, if I was to schedule myself towards this job, simPRO is going to say, well, I'm actually worth $65 plus 20. So I'm actually at $85 an hour. So this is going to say I've lost money on the job based on what I budgeted for on the job. So it may be the case, it may not be the case, it may be incorrect. So really what you need to make sure that happens in here, all these numbers are correct to ensure that you're going to get the best possible reports out of simPRO. The main thing in here, the overhead rate in here should match the overhead rate in those labor rates tabs. What I get paid and what my on costs are, they are what they are. So yep, just make sure every one of your employees are now correct and accurate based on the new figures that you've worked out. The next thing I wanted to mention, seeing as we're in the employee area, have there been employees that have, unfortunately, you've had to let go through this whole COVID thing? It's a good idea to start actually cleaning up your employees as well. So if, I don't know, apprentice first year no longer works for us because we've had to let them go, we want to make sure that we're going to options and archiving our employees and make sure that this screen is nice and clean and you've only got the people in there that you actually are going to use. When you do go to archive someone, if you had forward scheduled them to any jobs, simPRO will say, do you want to reallocate those schedules to a different employee when you actually archive them? So you can say, okay, well, take all those schedules, move it to employee third year, and then archive the employee. What's a good idea if you are going to do this? And a strategy that I've kind of adopted in the past, so you don't lose those schedules. It's not a bad idea just to temporarily create a new employee called unassigned jobs, for example. When you then archive that employee, reassign all those schedules to that unassigned employee. So that way, you know, when you're looking through your schedules, you're going to see all these bookings towards unassigned employee. You can then re-drag them and reallocate them to who you actually want them to go to. So that's just a nice little trick that I've kind of come up with over the years to try and help figure out what we need to reallocate. One of the other little things as well, if you have archived an employee and you've been in the fortunate position where you can actually bring them back into the business as well, it's not very obvious of where you need to go to actually get that employee back to life again inside of simPRO. So if you click this advanced button, you can filter by the employee status. You want to change that to archived. That will show anyone that you have actually archived. What you can then do is you can then go options, activate employee. That'll bring them back into your active employee tab. So then they can start being rebooked again towards jobs. So if that is the case and you've just brought that employee back, again, not a bad idea just to jump into that employee card, make sure all the cost centers are all okay, make sure the zones are okay, their availability is all okay, their pay rates are all okay, and everything else. And then you can kind of take it from there. So always a good idea to make sure employees are nice and clean, and they're going to give you the best possible result inside the system. Cool. Alrighty. So the next part that I want to talk about is going to be talking about materials. So this one's definitely not going to be anywhere near as long as that chat, because I think that's probably the most important one out of this. If you get nothing else out of this other than that, then I've done my job. So in terms of the materials, I'm going to jump back into my system setup. There's a couple of things I want to talk about. I want to talk about the pricing tiers. So in terms of the material markups, if throughout this whole thing you've had to drop your markups to try and stimulate work back into the business, rather than just manually going through things one by one and readjusting the markups inside the jobs, not a bad idea just to jump into your materials and create a pricing tier. You could just create a brand new pricing tier, which is your material markups. You could just call this your COVID pricing tier, for example. Make this markup maybe 15% on cost, create that, and then maybe make that your default pricing tier as a short-term stopgap. When things go back to normal, maybe open up your original one, make that the default pricing tier, so that way it doubles back to where it should have been pre-COVID coming out. So definitely something to consider if you are just readjusting all of your margins on a job-by-job basis and it's doing your head in. Really good just to maybe create a brand new temporary pricing tier just to kind of drop your markups and try and stimulate work back into your business. If you've never really played with this scaled pricing before, really good opportunity to maybe even have a think about this. So scaled pricing works by saying to simPRO, if an item costs between $0 to $10, what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark that up, say maybe 50%. If it costs between $10 to $50, I'm going to mark that up maybe 45%. From 50 to 100, I'm going to mark that up 35%. Or maybe that's probably a bit too high. Maybe let's go 20%. And then anything from 100 onwards is just going to fall down into the 15% markup. So that way, again, it's going to avoid you having to continuously readjust your markups based on the cost price of those materials. So if you haven't seen it, didn't know it was there, really good opportunity to maybe just have a look through this just to see whether it's something that you might want to potentially move towards. The other thing that I wanted to talk about from a material perspective is going to be trying to automate things a little bit more. So you may have had a temporary bookkeeper that you may have had on for 2 or 3 days a week. You may have had to, unfortunately, scale back the amount of hours, and you're having to pick up a lot of the slack. So if that is the case, again, it's probably a good opportunity to have a look to see whether you can start automating some of those processes. So under the utilities and the import, simPRO has a couple of really nifty little features inside of it where you can get automatic imports into the system if it's an applicable wholesaler. So when I go to import my catalog, you can maybe jump to MMEM, for example, if you're in the electrical world, and you can actually set up automatic syncing for this specific supplier. So you could say, well, this is my user ID, this is my password, validate that, and then simPRO will automatically do API calls into MMEM's database, or AWM, or Go, as Go I think goes part of them now, and actually do API calls into their database, have a look at your pricing, and then bring that back into the system. So a really nice way to make sure that your pricing's on point, because again, suppliers are going to be affected by this as well. So you may find that pricing may have actually changed based on the price of copper and cable and whatever else you're buying. Really nice way to make sure that your catalogs have the most accurate pricing possible. The next part to this is supplier invoices. You can actually automate, again, based on the supplier, which supplier invoices automatically make their way into the system too. So again, I'll just pick on MMEM. So if it is those guys, you can actually put in your user ID and password. So simPRO will do an API call every night over into their database to say, well, I've got open purchase order number 1234 in simPRO. Now, in your database, do you have a receipt or an invoice for purchase order 1234? If it matches them up and says, yes, it does, fantastic. What's then going to happen is it's going to grab that invoice, bring that back into simPRO, receipt that purchase order, and get that job ready to price up out to the customer and get it ready to post across your accounting package to make payment for. So again, if you've had to kind of reduce hours for bookkeepers or whatnot and admin staff, maybe it's a good idea to try and get that automation happening. Cameron just sent through a message as well. Really, really good update. So Reese Plumbing auto integration starts next week. So that is the case, yes. So I got an email update from simPRO saying that Reese is now coming into play as well, which is awesome because so many people in the plumbing world use Reese. So it's going to be really good to see that their API integration is going to start taking place inside of simPRO as well. So if you missed that update, that's going to be coming not too far away as well.
Can I ask a question, Adam?
Sure you can.
It's a great implementation that simPRO have done, but one of the challenges we have found with the auto import is that if the supplier provides the wrong price, it creates double, if not triple, the amount of paperwork. Have simPRO looked into this? Is there a workaround?
Not really. I mean, the best workaround you've got, or the best way to kind of pick it up, is going to be probably running your price discrepancy report. So in View Reports, you do have in here a price discrepancies report.
Yep.
So the price discrepancy report is, I'm just going to leave it all empty. I can choose my discrepancy based on the order price or the catalog price. So I might go the catalog price for now and do a search.
Yep.
So what this is going to do is this is going to have a look to see all of your catalog pricing and your last invoice price. So for example, C&W over here, so I've just clicked on the order number. Let's go back. So in here, so it's saying that this particular parts, this 2015WE, so this GPO, I've got listed my catalog price at $8.38.
Yep.
My invoice price was at $7.
Yep.
So I've receipted 67 of them. So I've got a discrepancy in my favor of $92.46.
Sure.
So this is probably the best way to pick up in total whether you're being overcharged or undercharged based on what your catalog price should have been. This can then be exported into a CSV. So we could say grab all those.
Yep.
And we'll actually go to the bottom of the screen, download it into a CSV file, and maybe then push that back to the supplier and say, what's going on with these prices, guys? Are these too much? Has there been a price rise we don't know about? Or was it that you guys went into a different C&W, which wasn't maybe your home branch, and they didn't have your pricing set up and they just charged you full trade price for them? But this is a really nice way to kind of pick up any discrepancies that have taken place. I guess you kind of need to decide is the automation of getting those invoices in. Are you going to save more time doing that and then running this report as a discrepancy report? Or is it going to cost you more time to do it because you're going to be running reports all the time to make sure you're not being overcharged? If that's the case, then maybe it's worth just manually receiving them. I think it's not a bad idea to set it up and maybe just give it a go and see how you go. And because you can always deactivate it if you need to, if you're finding that it's not working correctly for you. The other kind of option that you've got for wholesalers that really aren't simPRO formatted wholesalers is you've also got a data feed that you can buy off simPRO too. So simPRO offers a data feed which you can take non-preferred wholesalers and get their invoices mapped through simPRO and then imported through their data feed into the system to receipt them off.
Yep, gotcha.
So that one, I think you can set up probably more redundancies for, because what you could possibly do with the data feed is that because the data feed needs to know what email address it's going to be monitoring, you could possibly just get your wholesalers just to send back your invoices business as usual. You could probably set up a different email address called maybe supplierinvoices@amakconsulting.com.au, for example.
Yep.
And then once you've opened up the PDF, you've vetted it, you've gone, yep, that all looks hunky-dory. I'm happy to pay those prices. Hit the forward button to this next email address. That's what the data feed is monitoring. It'll then grab that email, strip it, and then import it into the system. So that gives you a little bit more opportunity to vet the prices before it goes in by doing like a two-step process through the data feed.
Yep.
That could possibly be a little thing. I mean, the data feed isn't free to use. It is a paid thing, but it's not super expensive.
Yep.
I think up to 20 feeds. So by what I call a feed is basically just a supplier's invoice.
Yep.
So each supplier would be its own feed into the system.
Yep.
So if you've got 20 suppliers, you could get to 20 go in like that. And I think it's going to cost you about $130 a month plus GST. So for the sake of $130 a month, you could automate pretty much every supplier that you could ever buy something from. And it works really, really well.
Yeah, gotcha.
Carl's just left a chat saying that's how they vet it. And he finds that it works really well. Yep. You probably had really good advice, Carl, in terms of how to set it up, man. I think that's what's probably happened. All right, cool. Carl's one of my customers. He's a good egg.
Yeah, we found that if we get a 413 WE and a 413-WE, same part, it doesn't. They don't marry up.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, that's
paperwork.
The data feed's probably going to be something similar to that as well, man, because it's got to be looking for the part number. I mean, what you probably want to do in that instance is maybe if it's creating a second part, maybe then just run simPRO's report for a duplicate catalog report. Sure. Yep. Merge those parts together and keep your catalog nice and clean. So that way it knows the next time it goes to import it, that part belongs to that part. So therefore it should accept it.
Yep. Gotcha.
Awesome. Okay. Couple more that I'm going to go through. The next one I'm going to go through is paid invoices versus customer statements versus overdue letters. So just in terms of making sure that your age receivables are up to date, I kind of wanted to go through a couple of nifty little things that aren't super obvious that they're there, but they're really good features. So I'm going to go to view reports for a sec, and I'm going to go to my age receivables. So from an age receivables perspective, again, because everyone's chasing money and everyone's trying to get paid, really good idea to try and stay on top of this as best as you can. In terms of running this age receivables report, a couple of ways that I really like using it. First of all, I usually start filtering by the aging groups. I don't really care what's not yet due. Not my problem. They've still got time to pay them. What I do like to do is to have a look and see what actually is overdue. So I'm going to tick those boxes in my aging groups to show any invoices from 0 to 30 days, 31 to 60, 61 to 90, 91 plus. So let's now do a search on that. So now we're specifically targeting people that are overdue rather than having to go, oh, no, not that one, not that one, not that one. So I guess from here, it's pretty obvious that you can run statements from here. So you could go options, view customer statements, and then run their statements. Alternatively, you do have tick boxes next to these as well. At the very bottom of the screen, you have some footer options. So you could print them off or email them out, and you're selecting what you're going to email out. Or if you want to give it to your accounts team, you could export that into a CSV and hand that out, get them to go follow it up. What I specifically wanted to talk about in here is going to be more the overdue letters, because they're not as obvious. So let's just say I'm going to pick on McVeigh Corp because I know he's a rat bag and he doesn't pay his bills quite clearly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go options and view customer statement. So when I view customer statement, it's going to have all my different amounts that are payable in here. If you want to, again, I know it's obvious, but not a lot of people use it. You can show just current invoices, so any invoices that are current, or if a customer wants a full history, you can go all invoices, and then it shows all invoices that have ever been sent out. So if they wanted a full audit of everything that they've that you've invoiced them or you've credited, then go all invoices. But what I'm going to do from here is jump to my Forms tab. So in the Forms tab, you've got the option to use a customer statement, but you also have these other two options. You've got an overdue letter and a final overdue letter. One's obviously going to be nicer than the other. So I'm going to go overdue letter just for now, and let's just view that to see what that looks like. So the overdue letter in here is going to list all the different invoice numbers that are currently overdue and the amounts that they're overdue. Yeah. So it's then going to say, dear accounts, our records indicate your account is now overdue by X amount. If you haven't paid it, please pay it. That'd be ace. We really like working with you and we want your money. So really nice little overdue letter. So it's not too bad. It's a really nice way just to reference everything. The only thing that this thing is probably missing is a how to pay section. So what I would probably do is I'd probably use this in conjunction with the statement, because the statement does have a how to pay section on it. So you'd probably save this and save the statement and maybe email them out of your inbox, for example. It's a bit unfortunate it doesn't have it, but it is what it is. The other thing that you can also do from here, if I just close that one off, is then just grab my final letter. So the final letter in here is very similar to that one. However, we start talking about collection. So if you haven't already made a payment, please do so. If we don't receive payment within 7 days, your details will be passed on to a collection agency and they'll take over collection responsibilities. Again, we want your money, please pay us. So that's the key difference between the first letter and the final letter. One doesn't involve collection, one does involve collection. Now, you may not like the wording of them, and that's okay if you don't, because everyone's different. It'd be pretty boring if we weren't. So if you wanted to customize them, you can actually do that too. So if I go to my system setup, you can jump into your form setup, and in here, you're gonna have your overdue letters. There they are down there. So the overdue letters in here are gonna have areas that you can say, okay, well, what do you want it to be called for starters? You can change what it's named. Overdue invoice numbers. Yep, so with invoice numbers, I do want that to happen. So in the overdue letter in here, what you can do is you can actually now say, I want to put a custom message in there. And you can customize that to your heart's content. Whatever you want to type in there, that's what will then get printed on that letter. So you probably just do also want to maybe include the overdue amount and all that sort of stuff too. So pop that in there. I mean, the subject line will still be the invoice numbers and everything else. That's all cool. You can't actually put a subject line in. It's just a message. And the overdue letter, if you want to get a little bit more feisty in there, you can also customize that to your heart's content as well. So I just wanted to kind of bring that to people's attention in terms of trying to collect money, because obviously cash flow is really important in these times. So I think that's a really nice way to kind of get onto it. And if you are having to kind of take the overdue letters and the emails and take them into your own hands because you didn't know simPRO had that facility, now you do, and maybe you can start using simPRO to save yourself a bit of time. And the last thing that I'm going to go through are filters. So this one, again, is going to be a nice little quick chat. So in terms of filters, so I've kind of made a note in here. I've got some customers that have got pretty specific and niche workflows and niche customers that they've worked with. Those customers may be the likes of pubs and schools and shopping centres and retail and offices and all that sort of fun stuff. It's been really hard to get into those places at the moment, just with the social distancing and only a certain amount of people allowed in one space at one time. So that being said, what a lot of my customers have had to do is try and diversify their income by offering different services that they ordinarily wouldn't offer. Now, if you have had to go down that path and you wanted to try and report on the type of jobs that you are diversifying. So obviously some people probably would have created new cost centers potentially to put into those jobs. Some people have probably been quite stressed out. They've just been using simPRO business as usual, just going out to do different work, okay? If you do want to double back on them to see, was it worth my time? And maybe look, moving forward, we may have made a decent clip of those different revenue streams. So it might be an area that I'd be interested in going down when things do return back to normal. Probably the easiest way to retrospectively figure out or do anything like that is to tag the jobs. So again, being in the system setup, you can go into your system setup and start creating some job tags, okay? Which I do recommend that you do if you have gone down this path. So this could be my COVID, my COVID call out, for example. I'll just call it that. One of the reasons why I like the job tag so much is because you can retrospectively tag things and you can do it in bulk too. So like if I go to my, back to maybe my list of, so I'm still getting used to these new menus, my list of completed jobs, I might then say, okay, well, what were the jobs that we've just recently finished? So I could have been that one, that one, that one, and that one. They may have all been different types of jobs that we've had to do as a result of this. At the very bottom of the list, I can go down there, grab my tag being my COVID call out, and then retrospectively tag those jobs. So then when I'm running my profit and loss report, I can filter my profit and loss report based on those particular tags. So I can say, okay, well, show me my service jobs, filter by my COVID tag, and then I can see how I've actually gone revenue-wise or profitability-wise on those types of jobs. It's a really nice way to kind of figure out whether those jobs that you've previously done, you should continue doing moving forward. Just a nice way to kind of make sure that you're on the right path, moving forward. So that kind of has taken me through all the different fun bits and pieces that I really wanted to have a bit of a chat about. So I guess I might open up the floor to you guys to see if there's anything specifically that you wanted to ask in relation to what I've spoken about, or if there's any, anything you kind of wanted to double down on and have a bit of a chat about. I'm happy to field some questions. No, we're all nice and quiet, all good. All right, cool. Did anyone, I guess, has anyone found the webinar for this COVID chat handy? And do you think anyone could take anything out of it in terms of what we've kind of gone through today? Or is it very much stuff that you already knew?
You've certainly given me a lot of food for thought with regards to the overheads, probably putting them in. So I'll definitely review that.
Okay, cool.
I'll maybe revisit. I'm still nervous, but I'll probably revisit the auto import of the invoices from the supplier.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think they're probably two keys for me.
Awesome. Good. Well, I'm glad you could take something out of it, man. It's good to know that I've been able to help. George has also asked, is the best way of correcting pricing with data feeds? Looking at invoicing and forwarding, we have that problem too. Yep, so I think looking at the invoicing and forwarding, that's probably the best way to go about it, George, if you wanted to kind of vet what's going into the system before it does go in. The best way of correcting pricing with the data feeds, what specifically did you mean about that, mate? And Carl said there's a bit I need to review in the overheads too. Oh, that's good. Well, I'm glad. Look, I'm glad that I think the overheads probably the most important part of this chat, making sure the overheads and the employee and labor rates and everything was up to date for everyone's builds. Like I said, that's really the key part that I really wanted to get out of this, because I think it's quite a powerful tool. So only a few suppliers have spreadsheets, so it's painful in your business. So the data feed doesn't need to just work off spreadsheets, George. You can work off PDF documents or emails as well. All you really need to do is have a chat to simPRO. They'll put you in contact with their data feed expert, and they'll help you map out, or they'll tell you what they need to map out PDF documents or whatever it is that you need. And they can map them to be imported into simPRO as well. So if you want to get, the other thing that you can also do as well, if the data feed can create items when it receives the items, okay? So if you're creating a blank PO, the data feed grabs that invoice, imports it in, it'll actually create the catalog parts. So because it doesn't know where those parts should live, where it will actually put them is in your catalog under no group up here, the second one down. So what you can then do, you could jump into the no group area, start ticking the boxes and start moving them into correct areas within your simPRO build to make sure that your catalog is nice and current and up to date. So it will create them on the way in. You just need to then jump to the no group and start reallocating them into different groups and different areas, man. And that should work. That should work really well. Cool. Awesome. Okay, well, I mean, if no one else has any other questions, what I'll do is I might end the webinar here. I'm going to cut it up and chuck it on YouTube probably in the next few days, I reckon. And I'll send out everyone an email to let you know when it's actually on YouTube. So if you wanted to double back and revisit any of the points we've discussed today, yeah, you'll be able to just watch that on my YouTube channel. Also, just a bit of a heads up as well. Bit of a sneak peek. Myself and a colleague, Darren, are looking at actually getting a YouTube series happening as well, which is going to be fireside chats with Daz and Ads, where we'll be sitting down and actually discussing different parts of simPRO, different feature releases, taking parts of simPRO and trying to put them in a real world sense to actually explain to people, yep, this is the update that's come out. This is how I would probably use it and try and implement it within your business. So we're going to be having some really cool fireside chats. It won't just be about updates. It'll be about different parts of simPRO. We'll be having a chat about simPRO Mobile. We'll be having a chat about the different features within simPRO. I'm also going to be chatting to different third-party partners. So the likes of Rexy at Groundplan, Hari and Hayden at 3Stack. Sorry, not 3Stack, at what are they called again? Sync Easy, e-plumbing estimators. I'm going to be chatting to a whole bunch of different people, getting their stories, what they do, how they integrate things into simPRO, and what they actually offer customers as well. So I think it'll be a really cool way to be able to kind of humanize different parts of simPRO, really take the high-level data that simPRO gives out from a feature release perspective, tear it down, chat about it, put it in a real-world sense, and how you could possibly actually use it within your business. So, yeah, if you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel, I'll put a link in what I'm going to send out to everyone when I then say, here's the YouTube link. Be awesome if you could maybe subscribe to it. That sounds really cool. And you make sure that you'll be able to watch those videos moving forward. But other than that, thank you so much for everyone attending. Sorry about the mucking around this morning in terms of Eventbrite playing funny buggers. But it's been good to see and chat to everyone. Hope you have a lovely weekend as well.